Why is it that when people get in positions of power and leadership, they think their shit don't stink? That, and today I'm going to get real about my own risks and failures as an entrepreneur. So, how can we make sense of bold moves and the leadership we need to design the human experience into our technology filled future? That's why my guest this week is Shanna Hocking, author of One Bold Move a Day. Shanna is a leadership consultant and philanthropic advisor with 20 years of experience raising hundreds of millions of dollars. So, for all of you founders out there listening, you're going to want to stay tuned. We're going to get real today. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues. There are a lot of them at the intersection of tech and people. So whether you're totally hyped on artificial intelligence and ready for that robot takeover, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, I'm here with my guest to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay. I'm a product market fit strategist, innovation consultant, and venture fundraising advisor. If you're new here, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So let's make sense of the bold moves, power, and purpose needed for the future. Shanna, how are you?
I am great. Thanks, Lindsay. I'm excited to be here with you.
I'm so excited. I always love talking to you, so this is going to be great. So we're going to start with our first segment. Crystal ball, what does the future hold? This is where I call out interesting predictions for this year, and the experts, my guests, they're going to tell us their hot takes. So I'm going to rapid fire a few headlines, and Shanna, I want you to say, yes, I want that to happen, or no, please no, whatever your gut reaction is. Okay. All right. Because a lot of your experience in the past is fundraising for universities, here's the one we've been talking about a lot recently. School to work path will be turned on its head. So companies are dropping degree requirements and colleges are facing an unprecedented enrollment cliff. So competition amongst them is high. True or false?
True. And I'm excited about this. I think there should be
Okay.
many pathways for people to choose.
Okay, cool. Awesome. I like that. I don't know why I was thinking you said no, we would say no, but the awesome, true. Yes, there are many pathways and the current just straight one doesn't work for everyone. So awesome. All right, next one, philanthropy. So philanthropists will demand less and trust more. So grant making and application requirements require just so much micromanagement. This trend says there will be a move to more trust-based philanthropy. Is that possible?
My heart says yes. My head says not quite ready for that.
Yeah.
I would love to see philanthropists be partners in trust with organizations that understand how to make a difference in our world.
Yeah. Awesome. For those of you that are listening on audio only, Shanna's jaw kind of dropped in excitement with this one. So you can tell that your heart wants one thing to happen. I know that a lot of these nonprofits spend so much time filling out paperwork and measure and sharing metrics and reports. And we want to free them up to do more of the good work that they are doing. But when there's a lot of money at stake, people want to know that it's working, right? So, age of the tech CEO hero will come to the end. Now, I know startup tech isn't necessarily your area of expertise, but leadership is. I talk a lot about this one, I think, as female founders, but any startup founders, the glorification of tech startup CEOs can help, can hurt. So, CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, Adam Newman from WeWork, like this just illusion that tech companies will save us has shattered. What do you think about that?
Agree. I think that it's not usually one person anymore that's going to save us. It is a team. It is a philosophy. It is values. And we have a lot we can improve on in making this possible.
I appreciate that because that makes a really great transition on values and traits and team orientation to our second segment. How did we get here and where can we go from here? So the media hype cycle is pretty far from reality sometimes, and it can make us really upset. So in this segment, I grab an eyebrow raising headline or trend, and we're going to talk through it. This one made my eyes roll so big yesterday, and it was so timely because I knew I already wanted to talk to you about this. CNBC headline: 80% of bosses say they regret earlier return to office plans. Quote, a lot of executives have egg on their faces. What's your first reaction to that headline? Gut reaction.
I'm glad they're acknowledging that they made a mistake.
Yeah. For me, it was duh.
That too.
Then someone was like, isn't it good that they acknowledge their mistakes? And I was like, yeah, okay, fine. But like, why
It's
they
an and.
why they do that? Okay, so one of the article quotes was, and I'm paraphrasing, they are realizing they could have been more measured, and rather than making big, bold, very controversial decisions based on executives' opinions rather than employee data, dot, dot, dot. And when I read this, I thought of you. I said, bold doesn't have to be controversial. Like, what do you
Mm-hmm.
think?
Well, I think the part that stuck out the most to me is the ignoring employee data. Like,
Yeah,
that to me is the part that I can't like see past. You had the data. You asked for feedback and then you ignored it completely.
yeah.
Leadership is not about asking for feedback just for the sake of it. And if you do, you erode trust. And trust is the foundation of how we do all of this, particularly in a remote hybrid work environment. So if you're going to ask for feedback, you don't have to do exactly what your employees are saying, but you do have to consider that there's something there that we can learn from, implement, and innovate.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things I always tell my entrepreneurs in helping them get their products into the market, besides the fact that in the startup world, we talk about lean iterations being like design, build, test. And the thing that is wrong with that is that it should start with research, design, build, test, right? Any big decision should start with research. It feels really weird for people to think that like they can just put their fingers in the air and know which way the wind is blowing. Yeah, I could go off on a diatribe about the misconceptions of like Steve Jobs and Henry Ford. Like they weren't predicting the future. They actually had tons of data and research. So it's like it's crazy to me that they had the data. And if they didn't have the data, I'm like, why didn't you ask for the data? Right.
Yeah.
But with entrepreneurs, I tell them like talk to your customers. They're going to tell you what they want, and your job is to like finesse it with your expertise to deliver a solution that they will be excited about. And that didn't happen, did it?
No, and it's still not entirely happening. I was at an industry conference this summer, and the first question I asked every vice president in the room was, are you working remote hybrid? And there was a lot of, oh no, or we are, but I'm really uncomfortable with it. And I
Mm.
wish we weren't. And I said, this is not the world that we knew before. And we can't keep leading the way that we led before. We have to lead for the world we're going to, not where we were before. And that's going to make us feel uncomfortable because leaders feel like they have to know all the answers and be able to show that they know them. And there's no answers for the world we're in right now. There's just relying on our intuition and our data and making the best decisions we can.
Yeah, I actually was going to ask you more about like what makes it uncomfortable, because I think some employees would surmise that they're uncomfortable because they don't have control, or they can't micromanage their employees. They can't see butts in seats. But do you think it's just simply change and fear of the unknown?
Yes, I think I've been doing something a certain way for 20 years, and all of a sudden, what I know is now not the baseline anymore. And, as a leader myself, leading through the pandemic, there was certainly moments where I was like, oh my gosh, this is upending everything I've ever learned, often the hard way. But it was also okay, this means I still have the capacity to grow and learn as a leader. So how am I going to do things differently because my team needs me right now?
Yeah. I always like to say leaders are learners. Someone said
Yes.
that to me once, and I said, I loved that quote, right? Like, it's a commitment to continuous learning and improvement. It's not knowing the future, right? No one knows the future.
No.
No.
And it's being willing to say, I don't have all the answers, because we were raised, right? 20 years ago, leaders were expected to know every answer, to not show any flaws. I think this is still particularly true for women in leadership. And so when we don't have to ask for help and we're supposed to know all the answers and the world is completely different than what we know, it's a sign that we need to say, hey, listen, I don't have all the answers. What would you do? What
Yeah.
could we do differently? How can we improve? What do you need from me right now
Right.
to show up as your best self?
I think sometimes, like as an outsider, because I've been self-employed for 10 years, and I'm really comfortable with a lot more uncertainty and risk than a lot of other people are. So when I observe behavior, harmful behavior that is driven by anxiety and fear of risk, I get really confused. I'm like, you're not dying. There's no tiger chasing you, you know? But so many people act from that like animalistic pea brainstem part of their brain when they're scared. And they
Yes.
do things that really mess it up.
Yes. And I don't think it's all intentional. Like, I don't think all of these bosses woke up and they were like, I'm going to be the world's worst boss today. I think is absolutely connected to fear. It is fear. Sometimes it's within ourselves, and sometimes it's within what our leaders and organizations expect from us.
Hmm.
So when the very nature of being an entrepreneur is being able to accept a certain level of risk, much
100.
more than the general population. From my background, working in universities and very long established nonprofit organizations, these organizations go back to like the 1800s. So nobody wants to be the person who's like, I was the one who messed it up after 300 years of existing. I walked in and made bad decisions that messed it up. And I think that onus of the history, instead of saying, okay, you know what, this whole thing was an innovation, I'm going to continue innovating and see that as an opportunity rather than a harness, I think could really help people become better leaders for the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah. So let's keep digging on this, and we'll get to risk and uncertainty as entrepreneurs in our third segment when we talk about me. Um, so on both LinkedIn and this podcast, we've been exploring the impact of outdated and or clunky software on employees' lives. This is actually one of my raison d'etres in my entire career and life. I've been seeing it from the very beginning. But one example, part of the healthcare worker shortage is rooted in how onerous the job has become, requiring some medical professionals spend 2 hours at the computer for every 1 hour of care. I strongly believe technology should be enabling humanity to do its best, not be the slave driver.
Yes.
Thoughts? Yes.
Yes. I mean, it's so interesting because I haven't approached the world through the technology lens like you have. But when you say this, I think about how much technology I used every day working in a very large, complex, multi-billion dollar organization. And how many times I was like, I would rather just like, I think I remember saying, do you want me to do the work or do you want me to put the work into some system that takes me twice as long? Like, what is the priority here? And then as a manager, being responsible for people putting in the work that I then needed to make sure that they did, but the systems didn't support it. I love how you said it should be enabling us to live the best humanity, to be our best selves, rather than holding us back from achieving our goals.
Yeah, and actually, one of my other podcast guests, not sure if I'll publish it before or after yours. So, but company called FundMiner, they come out of the advancement office at a
I
university
just met
as well.
Chelsea.
You did?
I
Okay.
did at the conference. That's so fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I talked to them because they spoke directly to probably what you're talking to, which is how many different systems and data with all the fundraising and funds and where the money can go, and you spend all this time trying to like compare different spreadsheets, and that is less time that the actual funding is in the hands of professors and administrators to actually give to students and programs that will, advance the purpose of the university and the purpose of that money in the first place, right? So
Yes.
That's
Yes.
cool that you met Chesley Lamego. Cool. Yeah, they're going to be on here as well. All right.
Love it.
So, time and again in my career, I've literally heard leaders say, my employees will use this software because it's their job to use it. And it's very top down, autocratic decision making, which is evidence in this headline that I brought up about, 80% of execs regret pulling everyone back in. So we talked a little bit about the history of that leadership style. Um, any other comments on the history of that before we talk about kind of the future?
Yes, well, the same leaders that are saying that phrase that you use, they're going to use this technology because it's their job, are probably also saying that my employees are very lucky to work here and they should be grateful that they have a job. And that whole mindset of command and control, because I said so, you will do, that's the old school way of
Command
approaching
and
leadership.
control.
And that's just not going to work in the world that we're in right now. And it's also not really enjoyable, right?
Mhm.
It's not enjoyable for people to just show up and do what they've been told all the time. And so we have to figure out how to evolve. Every profession has to figure this out. It's not even unique to one industry. It's how are we building trust? How are we listening? How are we sharing values and mission? And how are we aligning with what people's goals and strengths are so we can get the best work and make the most progress together?
Exactly. So I really despise that part of that leadership style, for sure, drives the workforce driven stress. And when people are unhappy, creativity and productivity stop in such conditions. And we can't solve our world's biggest problems like this. Like I like to say, the wheel wasn't invented in the boardroom, right? So what's we have so many huge problems in this world to solve. It pains me to see workers entangled in technology that's not really helping them do their best. Same with leadership styles, not helping them do their best. uh, so what is the modern approach to leadership? Like, what are we being called to do now?
So I think that what leaders do now is they create a shared understanding, mission, purpose, values, goals, clearly communicate those things and the vision for where we're going. And then they bring on really great people and allow them to make the best decisions they can with the information that they have, the training and investment from the organization in order to move the organization forward.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I think people aspire to do. Like, I don't think anyone thinks that they're a command and control leader,
Mm-hmm.
using our earlier example, but they probably are. And the reason that they get caught up oftentimes is they don't clearly communicate the vision, or they do it once and not ongoing. And then they keep interfering along the way because, God forbid, we get off track, right? I just need to make sure we're doing okay. Instead of saying, like, I trust you, I believe in you, I've trained you, go do this work and then
Mm-hmm.
report back to me.
Mm-hmm. I think the people that probably are the worst offenders at command and control are not even reflecting on their leadership style at all.
For sure.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who are like, the coaching that you offer, Shanna, that's for someone else. Right.
Right. Right. Um, so what are, okay, so one is, mission, vision, values, giving people like the general roadmap and being okay with the fact that I like to say life is a game of chutes and ladders. Like most things that we try to accomplish, whether it's in the startup world, when I think about what it takes to get funded and build a company, whether it's something we've talked about in the past, like making a TV show and figuring out the entertainment industry. It's a game of chutes and ladders. And it seems like one trait also is that being okay if someone hits a chute, right? Like it has to take a step back and realign, like, reposition themselves.
Yes.
You think that lesson has been learned because of COVID, or you think we're still struggling to get away from like the perfectionist, and all things must go up?
Yes, I think it's we're taking a step forward and then a step back in the same day sometimes. That I think this idea of progress over perfection is something I hear a lot from leaders, but how are you showing that in your actions? Like, I don't want to just hear that. Like, did you tell your whole team about a time that you failed and what you learned from it? Did you spend time in a leadership team meeting saying, here's how we're going to handle this when this happens in the future? Did you create opportunities for innovation for things that might not go exactly the way we intend for them to? And then did you celebrate people when they tried to share ideas, even if it wasn't exactly what you ended up doing? I think that's the part we're missing, is like people are reading books or they're hearing things or they're, on podcasts, or they're reading articles and they're like saying the right words post pandemic, but it's like you have to show up like that every day for people to trust and believe that that's what you mean.
So, um, you're absolutely correct. The progress over perfection. And I love that you keep saying things that are pushing to like the next segment. And I'm going to put a pin in it. You said, it's important that we share our failures so that everyone can learn. Um, you learn more. Actually, I follow a lot of sports. I don't know if you know this about me. I'm big
I don't,
Philadelphia
but you're a
Eagles.
Philly girl,
I'm a
right?
Philly girl. I'm a big Philadelphia Eagles fan, and there's, the quarterback Jalen Hurts says, you either win or you learn, right?
Yes.
There's no failures, and I like to say there are no failures. There's learning lessons, but failures can feel like a gut punch, and it's hard to like stand up and share those. And before we move on to talking more about failures and nay learning lessons, in your book One Bold Move a Day, you write for all types of leaders across organizational hierarchies. Like, it's not just for people at the top. I think I've talked about this on the podcast a lot as well. Middle managers have really been squeezed during the pandemic. They've been elevated into these roles, and everything they learned pre-pandemic didn't apply during the pandemic. They have to manage in a totally new environment. They've got leaders at the top who are making these very controversial, I'm not even going to say bold decisions, they're just controversial, ill-informed decisions. And then they've got the employees who are like, this is bullshit, and like are very unhappy. So when I want to take a technology lens, I spoke to, and I'm sure you're familiar with Naomi Titleman, who's also in the Upside with us, and we talked about enterprise software and how onerous it can be. And as a middle manager or anyone in the organization, it feels really challenging to change something like the enterprise software infrastructure and like the business processes. So, like, what kinds of bold moves can, people that are in the heart of the organization, make on behalf of their teams to just like improve the way they do things, or make it more enjoyable? Do they need to just eat it, or is there ways that we can move around it?
I think that the middle manager role is the hardest role in the organization. And the organizations that I'm seeing thriving post pandemic are investing in leadership training for managers specifically. Like some of the work that I'm doing with what I would consider to be like the most forward thinking clients is they're saying like there's no training for how to be a manager, and everything to your point we knew pre-pandemic is just not the same. So not only do we want to train them as a cohort, but we want them to be accountability and support partners for each other because they are experiencing similar challenges. And when you bring them together to support each other, they also now have a shared voice in the organization.
Mm.
Where I think people often get stuck is they're like the one, like, middle manager with these wonderful ideas, leading from where they are, supporting their team, but they feel so alone, and they don't see how they can make a scratch, dent difference looking up. But when there's more voices joining together to say, hey, listen, org, this isn't working, this is what we're hearing, it creates both psychological safety for them, and it also creates a little bit harder to ignore voice for the senior leadership in the organization.
Mm.
So I think that, they know what is happening at every level. They are managing from all directions. So whether it's this enterprise software is not meeting our needs right now, we're going to have to prioritize the many responsibilities that you've given to us, or we're not getting clear messages through this organization. It's kind of like a game of telephone. Those are things that I think middle managers are best positioned to share, but it's not easy for them to speak up unless they feel supported by their leaders to be able to share those kinds of messages.
I think the one thing that came to mind, and I do have experience. I've worked with corporations. I've worked with a handful of Fortune 500 firms over my time, and the hierarchy can make it such so that those middle managers are competing with each other, not working together, right? Especially when it comes to performance management. And I know that's a huge needle in the haystack, or thorn in the side of a lot of corporations too, is how to do that well. So it seems like a challenge to create a congenial kind of team mentality across middle managers if they're in direct competition with each other.
Yes, I think it goes right back to those shared values that we talked about before. That if you're saying, like, this is how we operate, and you're demonstrating in your day-to-day actions, we don't reward competition, we don't reward colleagues who, cut you off at the knees in order to get what they need for themselves or their teams, then they've already created the foundation. But it doesn't just happen by osmosis. You don't put a bunch of managers in the room and say, okay, go figure that out. I mean, some teams can obviously do that, but it usually takes an external facilitator who's able to say, okay, how do we approach this now? You know the org best. Here's some thoughts I have about how we can do this. But I think that when people at the same level are forced to compete for resources, you've already created the kind of organization where no one can thrive.
Yeah. Oof. It sounds really tough. And I think one thing that you said the loneliness, like when you look up and you can't see that, like, the change that you can make, it feels like it's just a scratch on the surface. I love the idea of creating a team across that layer so they have a collective voice, because as entrepreneurs, we sometimes are on a lonely path, right, trying to create a big change, right? Yeah.
For
She's
sure. I
nodding
mean,
for
I think
anyone
that's
on
what the power
audio.
of community.
Say that again.
I think it's just the power of community wherever you are, right? Like, none of us really does this alone. Even in the entrepreneur world where you are running your own business, we do it better when we have people that we can support and who will support us.
I 100% believe that. Last question about this, if it's my curiosity driving it. Um, is this a generational thing? Like, do you have optimism that the generations coming up will have a different mindset when it comes to leadership? Because they're also in great conflict with the existing corporate kind of hierarchy and system. And I'm talking about millennials and Gen Zs, and I don't know, what are they
Yeah.
called? Alphas. You're a mom, so you might know better what the teenagers are called. But
So I think that for every single generation, the one that is just joining the workforce, the early career professionals, are always perceived as radically changing the entire organization. I know that when I entered the workforce a little while ago, that people were like, oh my gosh, your generation just automatically wants to be in the CEO role, right?
are you an
And then
Xer? Is it you?
I'm a Zennial. So
Zennial. Okay, so we're similar ages. What, can I ask you what year you were born?
not on a podcast, Lindsay, but I am, I very proudly say I'm at the border between X and millennial.
Me too.
And the reason I think this is important is that I'm definitely not Gen X, like
Yeah.
by any stretch of the imagination. And that's a very wide thing. And that like the millennial experience was also different. But, after I graduated college, the two, twin towers fell down and our
Right.
whole world fell apart. So but everybody thought then that like we were going to break every organization, and then millennials came in and the same thing was said. So I what I say is that everybody feels like every generation is going to break and change the world, and they haven't. What I think is distinctly different about Gen Z is that they entered the world when the world was on hold. And we've seen market crashes, we've seen dot-com burst, we've seen, God forbid, terrorist attacks, but nothing like the pandemic. And so the thing that I cannot predict yet is how the Gen Z generation is going to really change the workplace. Because first, we have to help them understand how to thrive in a workplace so that they can then change it. And we've got work to do on that.
Yeah, there's a whole conversation I've had on Make Sense about them coming into the workforce and during the pandemic and missing out on these intangible in-person moments where they learn about the mission, culture, values, vision, where they learn about different pathways and opportunities within an organization. Like they only know what's on their screen and who they've been able to connect with, and it's very it takes a lot of the serendipitous learning out of the process for them. So it will be really interesting to see how they shape mission, vision, values, culture,
Yeah.
right? When they didn't have the same introduction to it the way that many of us did in person.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So we're coming into our last segment. Who needs a safety net? So this segment is usually where my guests share entrepreneurship related risks and failure stories, nay, learning lessons, aiming to extract valuable insights. In a twist, I am asking for advice considering my current situation. One thing I will tell everyone is that I have perpetually been bored at every tech startup failure panel, right? I never thought anyone really showed up and dug deep enough. Like there weren't enough tears. If this was really a big failure, why are you not crying? So I'm laughing, but my pop-up always said, I know you're going to be okay because you're still laughing. So Shanna, I'm currently going through a transformative period that can only be described as life experience. So full of change and challenges, both personally and professionally. And it's been a roller coaster for the past 18 months. So it's not even just like what has happened in the past week. So recently, I learned I won't be receiving a job offer after a very extensive interview process that was spanning 4 months and 6 rounds. So I've been an independent entrepreneur for a decade. So taking this leap into a full-time role was definitely a significant one for me. And because of the roller coaster, I'm just feeling, like what is going on and where should I go next? So facing this setback, which I'm presently experiencing, feeling powerless, feeling exhausted, that loneliness, like how do I make an impact, super confused about where to go from here. And given the content of your book, I couldn't let this opportunity pass me by to, understand how I can leverage its mindsets and strategies to move ahead. So I kind of am going to pass you the baton and let you ask me a few questions or tell me what's already on your mind because you've gotten an inkling of what I have been going through. And then I'll kind of ask
Yeah.
you some questions and we'll see where the conversation goes.
Okay. First, it's really special that you are leading your community through this learning with you. I think we talked about this early on about what leaders do and how we show up and who we are as people.
Mhm.
And I just really appreciate that you're willing to do this in a way. I really
I'm
admire it,
already
Lindsay.
crying for everyone on audio. I used waterproof mascara today. Let's go.
Okay, good. So, tell me or us, what prompted you to do something that was so different from everything that you know and love and have experienced for such a long period of time?
I will say there's a lot. There's obviously a lot of reasons. Um, for those of you that know, I developed a learning experience called Labs, Product Market Fit for Pre-Seed Startups. I developed that in 2017. And I worked on that for like 5, 6 years, over 75 entrepreneurs who have gone on to raise over $6, $7 million. My biggest like pride is that the first 4, 5, 6, 7, all of the original entrepreneurs that did Labs are still in business today, which
Mhm.
like is huge for the startup world. Like that's a success rate unheard of. Um, but while Labs has product market fit, it does not have product channel fit, right? So going direct to founders did not build, like selling B2C did not build a business that on which I could keep going and
Mm.
evolving as a professional, right? It
Yeah.
was a hustle to get every single founder that ever did Labs. And I decided to put it on the award shelf. I think it has a future in some other context, um, maybe, other models. When I made that decision, this investment fund came and found me
Mm.
uh, a year and a bunch of months ago and asked me to work with them for 6 months. And if all went well, they would elevate me and hire me full time to run this startup program. So when life gives me opportunities like that and they feel right, I follow them.
Mm-hmm.
And I did the work. So like your coach, you're a leadership consultant. I hired a coach to help me. I had not been in a work environment for a very long time. I had some trauma with like employees and coworker experiences from the past. So I did the work. I evaluated the opportunity. I stayed honest. I knew that the pros outweighed the cons, but I understood the cons.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that specific opportunity did not come to fruition last
Mm-hmm.
November. And I was okay. I was like, it's not meant for me.
Mm-hmm.
Then another program is in need of a managing director and a leader. And I'm like, that seems more up my alley. Like
Mm-hmm.
that one seems like a better fit for me. So the reality is that there was some conflict in the decision making, right? I'd be giving up my independence, but I'd be getting a predictable salary. I'd be doing everything that I've already been doing on my own, right? But I'd have the support, community, collaboration with others. And I saw the opportunity as a platform for me to continue to grow the next steps.
Mm-hmm.
Here are some of the cons. To be honest, as much as I love working with early stage startups, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I've been working with them or building my own startup since 2005. So it's a
Yeah.
long time. I also have much bigger macro passions about the way I see the world. and the way technology is inhibiting our progress as humans,
Mm.
which is what this podcast is all about. So, yeah, I think that fear of the unknown, probably, not wanting to have to, being exhausted with entrepreneurship, not being at a point where I was sunsetted, like the primary focus of my business, having something that was delivered to me almost on a silver platter seemed like something I should take seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of those things were motivating me to maybe, you know, trade a few years of my life working for someone else, working on their dreams and passions in order to fill up my own bank account and take a few breaths to figure out, what's next for me, even though I'm tired of doing that work.
Yeah.
I also felt really good, though. I felt really confident in who I was. As a person, I enjoyed the person that I was when I was working with them last year. So, yeah, there were pros and cons. The cons were, giving up 10 years of my own flexibility and freedom. But the pros, there were plenty of them too.
I think that's true of every situation that we face. There are choices that we make. And what I hear when you talk about this experience is so many choices that you made. And I know that ultimately we're talking about the choice that was made for you. But what I hear is you thought through everything that you had done and you figured out ways to apply that in a new way, and you put yourself out there continually, even though nothing was promised. Though it was presented on a silver platter, nothing was promised.
Right.
And that when it didn't work out in that first example, it made you even more aware of what you did want and didn't want for the second example. So as someone who wasn't alongside you through all of this, I just want to acknowledge how much I hear in your autonomy in making choices and the learning that you took from them, and the continually putting yourself out there in situations that were not ones that you had been in a really long time. You put yourself back into a work environment despite previous employee workplace culture trauma, right? And
Yeah.
I think that is a bold move,
Yeah.
Lindsay. The bold moves, as I define them, are meaningful actions that help you move forward, learn, and grow. And this part's so important to me because bold moves do not always go the way we've hoped or planned.
That is true.
But you keep putting yourself out there because you believe in what's possible. It's not just because you're tired or your bank account or your whatever. It's because you also believe in what is possible for yourself, for the organization, and for the people that you're going to be able to influence and support in the work that you do.
Yeah.
So the other part of this that I want to hear from you is, how much have you celebrated this learning and experience that you just shared with us?
It's only been 5 days. It's been 5 days, so not a ton. I think that I knew going into the final round of interviews that I had shown up as 110% myself, that I had done the work. And if they didn't want me to do the job, it's because they wanted something different, which is the
Mm-hmm.
case. They wanted someone with more subject matter expertise in a very specific industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wish they figured that out earlier.
Sure.
But no, I haven't taken the time to celebrate. I took the time to lick some wounds over the weekend.
Good.
I'm taking
Self-compassion is really important.
I'm taking the time to do this session with you.
Yeah.
Um, I was very grateful through the entire experience for the support I got from my community. So that was great. But no, I haven't thrown a party
Well, listen, celebration is not always a party. Listen, 5 days is a real that is a short window, right? So I don't know that we all had context for the timeline under which we were processing this news. So the very first thing to do, despite that we can say that rejection is learning, which it is,
Yeah,
right? Failure is learning, which it is like feel your freaking feelings.
of course.
What I believe is that when people say work is not personal, F that, right?
No,
Work
fuck
is
that.
personal. Work is personal. And it's actually a good thing, in my opinion, because the caring and investing that you do in the work that you do, whether it's for you or from another company, is literally what makes you who you are.
100%.
So you're going to feel it when it doesn't go exactly the way you wanted it to. And so we're not at the celebration stage yet. First, we need to feel our feelings. But I just want to tell you that there's so many moments that I hope you write them down while it's fresh in your mind. Actually, spend time writing down this entire thing. And if you're not a writer, I know you are, but if you're not a writer, my best advice is to take your phone, go for a walk, and talk into Siri
Yeah.
all of your thoughts and feelings. And then you come back and you have them in front of you because you'll want to look back at this over time
Yeah.
and remember all
Yeah.
the feelings that you felt.
Yeah. I wrote, so there's like two things. I want to share a couple, well, I have made a couple metaphors for the experience that I am going through. I will say, just to demonstrate, one of the reasons I wanted to do this session with you, I talk about designing the human experience into the future, right? This is a very human experience.
Yes.
I like to talk about failure because we learn more from our losses than our wins, right? And I also have one thing I've realized is I've been very committed to wanting people to like know what the reality is of of the risks, right? Um, One of the examples I like want to write some things down so I don't forget them. So I backpacked around the world for 6 months in 2010. I left Silicon Valley at the end of 2009 thinking I wasn't cut out for this industry and my tail between my legs. And I quit my job. I bought a round the world trip ticket and backpacked for 6 months. Now I started my trip in like Australia, New Zealand with a friend of mine. And I always knew I wanted to go to India, but I had some flexibility on the time frame. My friend did not want to go with me. Now, in those first 3 weeks down in New Zealand specifically, I met a Swiss woman who was just a few years older than me. We were in our 20s. And she had just spent 2 months traveling around India by herself. And it just sounded so freaking cool. And I was like, well, if she can do it, I can do it. Bravery is one of my strengths. Like, I have a propensity to take risks and put myself out there. And I got to India thinking I was going to spend 5 weeks there. And within the first 24 hours, I was on a train from Mumbai to Goa, sitting by myself, curled up in a ball, being like, what the hell did I get myself into? Like, it was that shocking of a like new environment and difficult place to be. I had people staring at me. I stayed in a hotel near the train station. Some creepy men knocked on my door in the middle of the night, scared, right?
Yeah.
And I have this video. It's unpublished. I still have it, of me in tears on an in an airplane bathroom 10 days later because I had more experiences that were shocking. And I recorded it because I was like, I don't want anyone else to be like, oh, if Lindsay went to India by herself, I can go to India too, without knowing what that actually meant, what that could actually mean for them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
because we have a culture that like celebrates the wins and touts, you know, like the idea of the tech CEO hero, uh, like touts that and aims for that, and it's like it's not true. It's only part of the picture. Um, so that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this session right now. And I also think that like being an entrepreneur and carving your own path, but even like all life, actually, the discipline of positive psychology says if you want to thrive, you have to build resilience.
Mm-hmm.
There is no life of thriving if you are not resilient. And you know, whenever anyone says like, Lindsay, you're so resilient, I'm like, oh, I don't want a congratulations for how hard I can take a hit, right?
Yeah.
But this is what resilience looks like. It's
Yes.
5 days later. I spent the weekend by myself. I didn't like, I tried to meet up with one person. I couldn't take my sunglasses off. I was trying to do something normal with them and I was in tears.
Yeah.
But, and like there will be more tears as there are right now, but I think it's also important to demonstrate what resilience looks like, what reaching out to people and asking for help like I am doing right now. Seeing it, right?
Yes.
So now,
So,
yeah, you go, because I've kind of been.
I'm thinking about so many things, but I want to talk about the celebrating wins part and failure because in One Bold Move a Day, I talk about the bold move mindset, which is the foundation by which you can make any bold move. And I want to highlight one mindset in particular, though, for this particular moment, which is what I call the and mindset. And it is this idea that when you can be comfortable with two seemingly competing truths at the same time, that you are able to thrive
Mm-hmm.
so that you can find joy even in challenge, that you can be ambitious and grateful, that you can experience a terrible feeling of rejection and loss and still want to share that learning with people you care about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we feel like it has to be either or. So if we celebrate our wins, that doesn't mean that we don't say it's really effing hard to get those wins. I think that that's the part where I don't want anyone to ever say like, oh, let's just look at the good things, right? The good things require us to look at the most difficult things and find something we can learn from that. And it's not about it's not about feeling positive all the time. It's about believing that we have the capacity to get back up to do something else. It's the not negative part
Yeah.
that is better. So, what I think is really important in this moment is that you can be both an entrepreneur and wanting to think about a life where you be, an entrepreneur working
Yeah.
for someone else. You can be super resilient and brokenhearted. And that middle is where I think if we could just be more comfortable there, instead of saying it's either or a zero sum game, that's where we thrive.
Yeah. It, I appreciate that a lot. You know, one of the other topics I thought about bringing up with you was toxic positivity, and you kind of like hit on. It's like I can be grateful, I can celebrate my achievements, and I can be crying out of sadness the whole time.
That's right.
um, I forgot where I was going to go with that. I think, we spoke earlier about a lot of leadership decisions being made out of fear of the unknown. And that fear, while I can look from the outside and be like, why are you so scared? Because, like, the unknown you're scared of is not that crazy. I've known some bigger unknown, right? um, like that's inside, that's a natural human feeling. And that definitely is a little bit of my sadness is that, look, making decisions, and you said I made a lot of choices, making decisions is hard.
Exhausting.
It's exhausting. You could have a full-time job and a security net and like not be worrying about money and whatever. And like if you just have to make a lot of decisions, it's exhausting. It takes a lot of energy, right?
Yes.
I talk about how, like, Obama didn't quit smoking while he was president because it takes the same energy store to change a habit is the same energy store for decision making, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if he's making decisions all the time, he doesn't have the wherewithal to stop smoking, right?
Yeah.
So I think, like, as an entrepreneur, you're making choices and decisions all the time, right? All the
Yeah.
time. And I think I was hoping life would make a decision for me.
Mm, that's really powerful. That's a really important recognition.
Yeah.
You've been doing this a lot longer as your full-time gig than I have. You know, I have been in business full-time for myself for 18 months.
Yeah.
And what I can say is we we create an idea of what stability and security is working for another organization that's not our own, that is not real,
It's true.
right? It's not real. We create the whole grass is always greener. It's just that the choices are made for us sometimes in those environments, and but I know what it's like to be very tired. And I know what it's like to feel like you just wish somebody else could just do this one thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I also know what it's like to feel out of control,
Right. To not have the choice, not
to
have
not
the
have the
flexibility,
choice,
like
and
all
to
the people.
feel
Yeah.
helpless. And that's never a word I would describe for you.
No, no.
So, in the end, right? In the end, you can be exhausted and love what you do.
Hmm.
You can want something new and still be grateful that you're doing what you are. And um, I I hope that you have many more choices ahead of you, where every time you choose what's right for you.
Yeah.
That's be my wish for you over and over again.
Thank you so much. I don't want this conversation to end. Part of me is like, don't end it because you're done crying, don't end it because you don't want to like bare your soul any longer. But I think we do need to end it for a lot of other reasons too. So let's make it make sense. If we're all going to design the human experience into the future, I think we need to get comfortable with what the human experience actually is, and that is accepting the duality, actually, like, multimodal of emotions that we can feel at the same time, and knowing that we're never alone. So whether you're a leader making decisions, you've got plenty of data and information to rely on. If you're an entrepreneur, lean into that support network of yours because it is there for you. Thank you for listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay Tabus, and guest, Shanna Hocking, author of One Bold Move a Day. You can pick up a copy of Shanna's book via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your favorite independent bookstore. We hope you enjoyed our take on the future of leadership and what is needed to design the human experience into the future. Shanna, where else can people find you online?
Yes, I'd love to continue the conversation. You can find me on my website, shannahocking.com, on LinkedIn and Instagram at Shanna A. Hocking as well.
Awesome. As always, you all know you can check out the links and resources in the show notes. And a final note, if you want to continue to be the smartest and most open-hearted person in the room, make sure you're getting notified when each episode hits. That means on YouTube, hit that subscribe for next week's episode. And for audio only, follow wherever you get your podcast. Thank you, Shanna, for joining us.
Thank you, Lindsay. Truly a gift.